Thank you, Alice. Bev, then we have Steve Hansen, and I just can't even read the next name. It's literally a scribble. So if your name is a scribble, you're on the list. Hey, Bev.
Thanks. Hi, it seems clear we're all against more fire. Seems like a major disagreement about how to prevent that. I believe if you cut down the eucalyptus, you will create more fire hazard because of how much moisture it creates. And if you want to talk about biodiversity, you could see in some parts of the East Bay where there's a mixture of forests that include eucalyptus and native with incredible diversity of animals and other plants. The eagles, the raptors, hummingbirds, monarch butterflies, many animals use eucalyptus. You can see it if you can shake your head, but you can go and see it. The situation here is very different than in Australia also because we have fog coming in off the ocean, which means that the tall trees like eucalyptus bring down moisture that helps prevent fire. But my understanding is the 91 fire happened primarily because there had been a fire, it had not been put out properly. No fire should ever be left to smolder for hours and until the next day, especially during high winds. From what I've been reading and hearing, embers on roofs, they don't come from eucalyptus 2 miles. The most flammable tree we have in the Bay Area is the bay tree, the California bay, which is why East Bay mud cuts them down in certain areas. Well, we can debate on and on about this. I don't have much time. My other concern is I get off the freeway on 35th Avenue, off 580, and there is a pile that's been there for months of a dead tree with branches, incredibly flammable, and it's never going to go away because nobody's going to remove it. The biggest amount of deaths in fire were at that building in the flatlands, and there's fires all the time happening. I'm hearing fireworks every night. They don't seem to be being stopped for any reason. When that gets more dangerous is when the people come up into the hills, and when you don't have thinning, and there isn't any worry about fire ladders because the forest, except for the trails, are as dense as possible, you're not going to have people going off trail doing fireworks and starting fires, because besides most of the fires being in the grasslands, they're also started by arson. So that's another issue where we can prevent fires. But I think vilifying eucalyptus is the wrong way to go. Other parts of the country and other parts of the world, people treasure their trees. They're trying to add trees. Oakland and the East Bay is one of the only places that they seem to want to cut down trees. Broom is less of a problem, and so is coyote brush, which is more flammable than broom. If you have trees, if they're tall trees, those plants don't even grow. The more trees, the less grass, the less poison hemlock, the less thistles, all the plants that dry out and that get flammable, they just won't be there. So I think as many trees as we can get, the taller the better. Another issue also in terms of money in Oakland is landslides. And I can see in some hill areas in Oakland where people have cut everything down because of what the rules are. And you can see when the next rain comes, the hill's going to go, the house is going to go right on the edge. There's a lot of that. People have no idea. Partly, some because they've just bought houses recently, some because they have never denuded their land like that. But all the trees and plants hold the hills together, including the eucalyptus.
Thank you, Bev.
Is that it? Just want to say one more quick thing.
Go
A lot
ahead,
of the
finish
stuff
up.
I was hearing didn't make sense. There is not bracken fern all over the hills. I never see it. I don't see Artemisia californica, which is the California sagebrush. I'm not sure what was being talked about I mean, I could talk with people about that later, but
Okay.
that's not what I'm seeing up there.
Okay, thank you. Steve Hansen, then we have Beth Wurzberg, and then Marla Schmally. Hi, Steve.
Hi, I'm going to try to make this quick. I'm an ex-board member of the Wildfire Prevention Assessment District, which just ends tomorrow, actually, officially. And also, I'm a member of the board of the North Hills Community Association. Your issue about 3% people living in Berkeley, you might check that because some of us have Berkeley addresses even though we live in Oakland, and so that's just an issue. I'm in District 1. But the Wildfire Prevention Assessment District has been working really hard because, as you know, the funding went away as of tomorrow. And the reason it was in existence for a couple of years longer than the actual district funding was because there was money left over that we wanted to make sure got spent in terms of controlling the city's properties and doing the vegetation management necessary. But we've been working very hard in our last month or two to make sure the city council knows that that problem doesn't go away. You still have to manage the vegetation. And so we've been trying to make sure the city budgets at least $1.2 million a year to do the actual work that's necessary to keep that vegetation from becoming flammable, and it is flammable, to make sure it's controlled. And we think we're successful. I know we went to the budget meetings, even though the last one ended in the actual council had to adjourn itself. So we've been working very hard to do that. We are not recommending, however, that the vegetation, that as we've already said, the WPAD be started again without the benefit of a plan. So we want this plan because we understand it's scientific. It will provide all of the information we need in terms of making those decisions. And for the same purpose, it's going to be scientifically based. And so decisions can be made based on that, plus the fact that there will be a CEQA document. And we hope the CEQA document will be enough information so that if we go after additional funding to do a vegetation management plan from FEMA, that we will not have a problem with that. And that's something that we have to make sure happens here. So anyway, that's the end of my comments.
Thanks, Steve. Beth Worsberg, Marla Schmalley, and then we have Martin Matureisi. Hi, Beth.
Hi, I'm Beth Worsberg. Sorry, too close. I have a few basically questions and comments about what's going to be happening in the future. We're really lucky in California to live in a place with such great biodiversity. It's globally recognized. It's a hot spot. It's really important, and it's up to us to be the stewards of this great resource that we have. So what I would like to ask is that we have a number of federally, state, and locally rare plants and plant communities here. And I want to know how they're going to be mapped. Is there going to be a biologist doing careful mapping and finding out where these plants are? Because even though we know where some of them are now, they're still not being properly cared for during fire season. For example, there's some Clarkias up here that are super rare. Karen can tell you about them. And they get mowed down every year before they go to seed. So all we're really doing is depleting the seed bank. And they're not really a big fire threat, so let's not do that. Let's think about this carefully. The second question is that if you're going to be opening up areas to decrease the fuel load, you got to think about what's going to move in there. We don't want to increase fire risk by having weedy grasses and annual weeds moving in. So, as a follow-up to that, what kind of funding is there for following up on these areas that have been cleared? Is there funding for 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years? How are you going to make sure we're not creating a larger problem? Fourth point, Phytophthora is a big problem right now in the hills. And there are a number of Phytophthora we have to worry about. So there are going to need to be protocols put in place, and there are different times a year when you can and can't work to at least prevent the spread of it or slow it down. I have a question like, what are the priorities going to be for what are the criteria for establishing high priority treatment areas? So I'd like to know what those are. And when you establish those high priority treatment areas, will there be options? Will there be different ways of reducing the fuel load? And I realize that may be site dependent, but that might be something where you could get to more of a community consensus. If the goal is to reduce vegetation, again, how do you decide what to remove? And the last thing is, there are other aspects of fire safety that we're not really talking about here in terms of the fuel management that have to do with us, with how we live and work in the area. We park on narrow roads and you can't get 2 cars through, even though this has been in the fire reports in the past, and it was a problem during the fire, and I still see it again happening in the hills. On my street, we don't have curbs, but we have fire hydrants, and people park in front of them. And the city won't do anything about it, and the fire department doesn't seem concerned about it. And I don't know if that's because there's not a curb, because I know if I go to Montclair or downtown, I park in front of a fire hydrant, which I never do. I will be ticketed or maybe towed, and I think you should be. So I think there are other human activities that we do that we need to monitor as well. It's not just the plants that are the problem. Our homes are the biggest fuel in the area. So I guess that's the last I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Beth. I don't think that we're in a position at this early stage to answer any of the questions except for maybe the federal and state rare plants. I think the answer is that yes, they will be mapped. But I've written your questions down, and we'll try to get to those as we've developed the plan. Hi, Marla. Then we have Martin Matraci and then Karen Paul Sell.
Okay, so the first point I want to make is in terms of preventing fires in the hills or reducing fire risk. I would say there is no science. There is none. And the reason I say that is because I was at a meeting talking about a new fire person. I won't say which side of the aisle it came from, but somebody asked me, Marla, would you be willing to go what the decision is about the trees if you saw the science? Would you follow the science? And before I could answer, somebody popped up and said, we know the science, we don't have to do that. Okay, but that response could have come from either side of the argument, because we've got experts everywhere. Let me give you some examples. I read something in an official thing very early after the fire, that the embers went 150 yards to cause fire, and maybe even 200 yards. I've since then heard a mile. I heard today 2 miles. I've heard them say that things went to San Francisco. I'm sure debris got in the winds. I doubt very much anything was alive. Okay, let me take another example. One of the arguments is if you got a eucalyptus tree, underneath the tree, nothing will grow, it destroys the soil. You have another argument by the same side of the aisle. If you have a eucalyptus tree and you cut them all down, don't worry, it'll be bare, because there's things in the understory, native things, and those will all grow up. They're there waiting to grow. Which is it? Okay, so the result of there not being a science, and the reason there's not a science is because we cannot take these exact circumstances and duplicate them and try and have control groups. Can't do that. So we come up with things. Oh, there's this many tons of trees in an acre. There's this many tons of grass. That's true. So what in terms of preventing fire? So what I would say is that I really hope that you look at what you are doing and try to understand what really makes sense. There's a lot of myth and a lot of claims. I see some on both sides, to be perfectly honest, that are not probably very substantial. There are others that are very substantial. How much difference does the fog drift make? What happens where they've thinned the trees in the East Bay Park? What grows under there? We haven't seen that. Let's go look at it and see what actually grows. What about the winds? How different are they after areas have been cleared? And I also wonder, I think in mapping the biology or whatever else you map, you really should try to map the winds. Because a lot of times I see trees have been attacked or taken down, and I look at them and I say, why those out of all the trees? And I try to understand, and the only excuse I could think would be if that was a wind tunnel, but I don't know that it is. And I look and say, why are these particular ones dangerous? Why did they just had an opportunity. So that's the first point I want to make, is we do not have a hard science. Therefore, this plan really has to have people looking at the effects of what we have done, of what we see, and evaluating the statements that are made. How much difference does it make? Let's go out and see how it looks where there's fog drip and where there isn't in August. Okay. Second point, in terms of fear of fire, I think, anybody has to say we don't want fires and all that, but this keeps getting stoked up. And one of the ways it gets stoked up, I heard a member of the board of directors last night, a couple nights ago, talking about how to get money on their next bond coming up. And somebody said public safety was a reason, and she said, no, fire safety, that's what'll get the money. So I think in trying to get money, whether it's for another fire district here or whatever, everybody stokes up this fear of fire, and it gets totally out of control. I mean, we could have the same fire about going out on the highways. We could have the same fire about the fear about things that we eat, or about not exercising or anything else, but it gets stoked up. And I think we should be very careful in wanting to raise money for a district, not to do it based on, you gotta do this because there's this incredible risk of fire and it's gonna happen any minute and nothing has happened to it. Nothing's happened since 1991. The conditions are twice as worse, okay? Things have been done, we need to do them, but
Thank you, Marla.
not to stoke that
We
up.
gotta wrap up now.
Okay, I have a couple of questions. In terms of ISIS asking or whatever, actually just in terms of your report, it was hard for me because I know those 3 areas very well that you showed, and I'm aware of them. I walk up there and I look, and I see that you say they're an area, and I see what's there, but I wonder, what would you like to do there and why? Or you know, I know you haven't decided yet, but what are you thinking? What might be done there? Okay,
So that's
and
gonna
so
come
I
next.
walk away feeling like I haven't really heard anything that I didn't know before, that those are areas, Shepherd Canyon, whatever. Okay.
Thank you, Marla. So the next time, just as a reminder for everyone, we come back to you, we will have more detail, but we didn't want to come and drop a plan on you without coming back again and presenting the outline and some of our biological methodologies. So, hi, Martin.
Hi, Martin Madarisi, former wildfire prevention board member and ex-city staff. I've worked in all these park areas that are being surveyed now over the last 30 years and still work there now as working for one of the goat companies. But I want to follow up with what Marla just mentioned. The crux of the matter is what do you recommend to do and why in each of these city park areas? And I urge you to as Marla was asking, what do you think? What's the scientific basis? References on those scientific studies that have been done that help you draw these conclusions and help you prioritize. Everybody wants to know what's going to be done near their house and how it's going to be done and why it's being done and how much is it going to cost. And those basic questions take a lot of background information to provide. So don't be afraid to put together a huge plan. We don't have to print it all, so it wouldn't cost that much to look it up electronically. We have a crowd here that these are all familiar faces to me now. And they're not afraid to pick up a big book or read a lot of electronic information. And they're avid readers, there are writers here among us, so you have an audience and we're ready for what you're preparing. We're ready for you. Thank you.
Thanks, Martin. All right, Karen, hi. And then we have Barbara Kluger and James Callahan. Hey, Karen.
I've been a volunteer with Friends of Salsa Creek since 2001, and Friends of Salsa Creek for over 20 years has been taking stewardship responsibility for the many, many parks in our watershed. One of the great things that we have is the permission to collect seeds and cuttings to propagate in our nursery, and then we plant 2,000, 3,000, 5,000 native plants every winter because we never pay for irrigation. We learn a tremendous amount through that process about what the plants are in the watershed, and including the parts of Joaquin Miller Park that aren't in the watershed. We've gotten up to 271 native species. And this report, with its little pie, can tell you number of populations and population sizes. So I will share this with you electronically. The other thing I've got is a map of the rare plants of the watershed. So what does Friends of Salsa Creek care about in this process? First of all, is protecting the rare plants species from extirpation in the watershed or serious reductions in population size. and not just the listed species, but those plants that are rare in our parks or that are rare in Oakland. Nobody's ever made a list of all the native plants of Oakland. And by the way, I do not consider Monterey pines and cypresses to be local natives. We'd really like to see an on-staff ecologist, either in the fire department, in the city administrator's office. Somebody needs to know what they're looking at. I don't think you're going to be training firemen to do that. I don't think you want to learn that, Angela, do you? We need somebody on staff to do that, who can help write up the management plans. I think for some of the places, the first year, they may specify one thing. The first few years, they're going to change a lot. So this guy won't be sitting at his desk, or this woman twiddling her thumbs. And these site-specific plans will need maps and very, very clear instructions, like leave the grass 6 inches tall. I mean, it's going to be really hard to train current contractors to change their behavior. We're really concerned about the loss of large extents of native habitat. I mean, I saw this with the Cal Fire clearance in Shepherd Canyon in 2003. I mean, there were times I just sat down on the edge of Escher Drive and had a good cry. And as someone mentioned earlier, converting grasslands that are part native grassland and part invasive annual grasses, or some of our scrublands, converting those into wastelands of thistles and broom, because we've seen this happen over and over. One of the things we've done working with the goat grazing contractor, I just really realized that this was effective. You try to say, okay, let's save this patch of yam pine, let's save this patch of another plant, because they haven't even bloomed yet. What you're doing is saving species for the late season pollinators, the third or fourth or fifth flight of butterflies during the year. So, you know, it's like an extra payoff. Not only do we get to save the seeds, but we get to produce more butterflies. And sites that have native plants, we need to maintain the seeds and healthy root stocks to replenish native plants after grazing or after clearing. We're really concerned about compliance with the Oakland Creek Ordinance and the erosion-sensitive clearance, even around those tiny little ephemeral creeks that are completely gone by May. They're completely gone now, but they're still creeks. You know, you have to go in, the USGS doesn't plot these for you. You have to go in with your topo map and draw them with thin blue lines on your maps. I've done that for our watershed if you would like to have it. You know, when you go to the park, you kind of want to be in a beautiful place. You don't want to be out in the middle of this ugly stubble. So the aesthetic values, which I guess the EIR will cover also, are really, really important.
Thank you, Karen.
And I just want to say that we've developed a really good working relationship with the goat grazing contractor, and I think that that could serve as a model. And I'll send you a sample map of that too. That can serve as a model for every place that goats are used in Oakland, because they can have a tremendous negative effect, and they're not choosy about whether it's a native or not.
Thank you very much. Okay, Barbara Kluger, then we have James Callahan and Peter Roche. Hi, Barbara.
I'm Barbara Kluger. I live down in the South Hills, and I'm somebody who has not been on the board of the WPAD, but I went to most of their meetings except for the last 6 months or so. So I do understand, and also I was on the ad hoc committee that started this process of getting a vegetation management plan. It's our vision for it, the committee that was part of the WPAD, has changed over time as it has become mixed in with the fire district and the city of Oakland, and now we have no control over it anymore, the people who started this out. One of our concerns that some other people have said a little about is the GIS. When we first put this idea together, we went and met with the tech team over at City of Oakland, the IT folks. And they said, while it's complicated because their software is disabled somewhat, it's not always, it can't always mesh with the things they need. Sometimes they do things in one kind of software and then they use a different kind for different things. One of the things that they understood that we needed, and I don't know if anyone has communicated this well to you folks, is that we want to have the GIS. You're going to be doing GIS stuff, I understand that, but we wanted to make it so it was completely accessible by computer to the public, and also that whenever, every year things grow and change, or maybe the mud washed away a section and something else came in. Things change over time, and the GIS system needs to be flexible enough to accommodate someone going in and saying, okay, this is not just an oak woodland, this is, there's been a change here, I think I've explained that part, that we wanted the GIS part to be flexible so that you could go in and say, here's what was here before, and this was the prescription that was demanded before, that was recommended before for this area in terms of fire prevention and vegetation management, but that now it's changed, and so that would be something that would come up on the GIS and would then be subject to different prescriptions for vegetation management. Is that something that anyone ever said to you guys?
So we have heard that, yeah, and
Oh,
adaptive management is definitely part of the planned consideration, and I think that's a part of what you're saying here. So,
Yes,
yeah.
yes. I haven't spoken about this before out loud, so it's not easy for me to do. Also, there was a lot of talk in this group from HCN folks about the trees, and frankly, from what I know about what is done in these open spaces within the city of Oakland, there wasn't a lot of tree removal going on from the fire department. They went in and whacked back the shrubs and the grasses, and the tree issues are really kind of separate. You should just know that, when you're all turning out here and saying, oh, don't take the trees. Most of what the city of Oakland does to maintain the vegetation for fire prevention, they're not cutting down trees. They're going out for the couple hours and maybe cutting some branches out of the way or getting some grasses, and that's about it. So that's one thing.
Barbara, I'm sorry, I have several more people.
Okay,
We're
I
almost
understand.
at time.
I will try to do very quickly on the rest. I wanted to mention that about the trees. I wanted to reiterate what Karen Paulsell said about the native plants, that a lot of people think about this vegetation management plan as being completely about fire prevention, and it's not. It's about mapping what's there and figuring out best practices for also maintaining the recreation value of these open spaces. And I would just hope that is kept in your mind, even though there are going to be fire department folks who are going to disregard that value entirely. And we know that because at all of these WPAD meetings, the fire department constantly talks about fire prevention this and firefighting that, and meanwhile, people who know these areas well are kind of saying, wait a minute, there's more to this picture. And my very last thing that I'm going to say is that some of the people who've gotten up and talked are part of a group that you may find very useful, and we called ourselves the OWLs, the Oakland Wildland Stewards. It's basically a bunch of volunteers who have shepherded and stewarded a lot of these open spaces that are near their own homes. They know those areas, and they are very scientific, and most of us are extremely well educated in ecology and plant science. And so I would hope that you would take advantage of the institutional memory of our group, the OWLs.
Thanks, Barbara. All right, James Callahan, Peter Rausch, then we have Lynn Barron. I'm going to actually ask that we, Lynn, yield your time for Jerry Kent, who hasn't had a chance to speak, and then Lynn can go again. Okay. Hi, James.
Hi, James Callahan, and I'll definitely keep within the 5 minutes. I think there is so much that we as a community, as Oakland, need to also understand what all the fire department does. There's so many tools, there's so many techniques that they need to use, and it isn't just trees. There's an awful lot that goes on to it. There's been a great deal of technology. Who would have our homes without smoke detectors? There's technology that helps us detect fires so we put them out quickly and find them. And a lot has come along since 1991 on how we can spot fires. If there's a ember still burning, we can fire. These cameras across the world, fire departments are using these cameras now. I know Oakland has them, but how much do we know? How much is the fire department being trained? Are these being deployed? Are we practicing with them? These are even tools that the community can go out and use. This is a tool we use in education. If we had more time, I would have given you a hands-on science demonstration in the back, but I know we don't have that. These are amazing. They will spot a cigarette way down on the other end of the street. They can spot fires quickly. And on high fire days, you go out and you look for fires. When there's been a fire, you look all over the place. You're still using your eyes and your ears and your helicopters, but these can double the ability to spot a beginning of a fire. That's the kind of studies that have gone on. We can bring papers and so on. But I invite people to get in on some of the technology. I don't know exactly what the Oakland Fire Department is doing. I think we should support them in bringing the latest technology and training. We are in a much better position than we were in 1991 to go after fires right away. Okay. The other quickly, I know that there is, for some, one of the motivations when we do talk about trees is by cutting down eucalyptus and other locally non-native trees, that there's a thing of, well, that's a great chance for native restoration, and I support. I'm one who would like to see many more redwoods and coast live oak and other trees, but we also have to look at, if we broadly look at it, Oakland. This is not a city where that's not going to happen. That's just not going to happen. If we look at what's going on throughout our city, this is, unless the community does it, it is not a city that is supporting the planting of trees. Thousands of native trees are going down every year in Oakland due to drought that we could have prevented and saved the trees. We're not trailing them without permits. The developers are getting just free rein to cut down native trees. And I would invite, I'm among them, that for those of us who really care about native trees, the first one is protect those we have. They're being cut down all over the place. And there's sources of money there. If we want trees, developers are supposed to replace the trees, and they're getting away with not paying for the permits and not paying for the costs of not replacing trees. Okay, then pay for native trees everywhere. If we care about native trees, then we should be out there protecting the trees we have. Okay, and we should realize there are other cities in Oakland, in California, that are doing a good job. So I mean, it's possible to remove natives and put in, but Oakland, this is not a place that's going to happen. There's other cities that are protecting their trees. And I think it's also, we want to work, I feel we should work better together. I think we have a lot of good souls who come from some different points of view, but we're sort of getting divided up by trees. And I think maybe also if we look at the city, we look at the whole California, we can find a little bit more some common ground. And there's a lot more to fighting fires than whether a tree stands or falls.
Thanks, James. All right, Peter Rausch,
I think a lot of native habitat fans have said things that I would say.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Jerry Kent, and then Lynn will close out with you. Hi, Jerry.
Hi, Rebecca. My name is Jerry Kent, and I'm representing the Claremont Canyon Conservancy tonight. Tim Wallace was supposed to be here then and tell you the Claremont Canyon Conservancy's view on fire history in the Oakland Hills. And as you can imagine, the Conservancy's views are different than some of the other views that you heard tonight. I started in Redwood Park in 1962. The park has changed, and I've certainly changed during that time period. That was 65 years ago. So you're working on a moving target that's very difficult to pin down. You're doing the 6 formal plan here in the East Bay Hills. The prior 5, one of them didn't have any controversy, 4 were really involved in deep controversy for a number of issues. What I'm going to give Rebecca is a draft paper of my observations over the last 65 years, both on the fire, on those plans, on the fire history issue, and the controversies that have developed over that 65-year period of time. Now, there is some reliable science. FEMA did probably the best job on fire science, on vegetation science that I've seen in the 65 years. A lot of it is very reliable. It wasn't respected by a number of people. I hope you're not thinking that you can do a plan that doesn't have some controversy, because you can't solve the fire safety problem in the East Bay Hills without dealing with controversy and conflict. The hills are part of the CAL FIRE very high fire severity zone, both sides of the hills. The park side, the east side is basically all public parkland, and the west side is residential area that you're going to be dealing with. And it's not just the city parks that are issue, it's the whole residential areas. And in that draft plan, I've divided the different areas in the East Bay Hills into 5 different categories. I don't think you can talk about it just as an interface fire problem. It's much more complex than that. The 1991 fire was an intermix fire, and it happened, everybody's got different views about how it happened, but that's all been pretty well documented in numbers of reports. I was there at the 91 fire. I helped park staff deal with the fire, and I dealt with recovery after the fire. So you're dealing with a very complex political issue and vegetation management issue that I hope you're willing to step up to the plate and deal with it, because Oakland is a very high-risk city. It may be one of the higher-risk cities in the state of California right now because of the Diablo wind and 100 years of development that didn't respect the fire hazard problems that are inherent in the East Bay Hills. So I wish you luck. I'll watch it. I'll give Rebecca my observations over the last 65 years. And hopefully you'll get something done that'll make Oakland safer.
Thank you very much. Okay, our final comment tonight, Lynn.
Sorry for taking a repeat stab at this, but I wanted to summarize by saying there have been some fantastic comments here from all perspectives. Some of the things that were said, you know, it's too bad that we didn't have more fire department officials here and we didn't have the city council listening here, because all of us have been talking about a subject that's much bigger than what this vegetation management plan is being contracted for. We're only dealing with 1,400 acres, folks, and everything else outside of that is either private property, and I would say that the homeowners, even in my neighborhood, are worse off than some of the city properties, or they belong to Caltrans. Somebody mentioned a big pile, a dead tree out on next to the freeway. That's Caltrans. So it's not all just the city of Oakland and the WPAD and the vegetation management plan that's all mixed up into taking care of fire safety in the city of Oakland. So it's only 1,400 acres. It's not, Oakland City Street is fire department, public works. And that's why I would say, too bad that the city council is not here and that the heads of public works and the fire chief, etc., are not here to hear everything that has been said, because you're talking about a systemic problem that is part of the political landscape of the city of Oakland. End of rant. In closing, I would love to applaud everybody for saying what will replace what is taken out. What is going to be done to remediate or restore or save those things that we need to save. One thing that I didn't see in the outline of the plan is, and maybe it's a subheading later on, is the restoration recommendations for the prescriptions. If you say, okay, let's take care of this particular canyon by, taking out some of the scrub, et cetera, what do you do to replace that? Or do you replace that? But if you're worried about fire, talk to your council person, talk to your state people, talk to the fire department, talk to the public works, because it's a lot bigger than just this vegetation management plan.
Thank you, Lynn. Just real quick, I just want to put this slide back up before Ken says a few closing comments. Just a reminder, this is how you can get in touch with us now. I do want to reach out individually to a few of you about your nextdoor.com accounts and other ways that we can get more individuals and a more diverse group of people engaged. And I did want to acknowledge that the next set of public meetings, we will have a draft plan available, and we have been doing this more formal public meeting setup, but we're probably going to move in our next public meeting into more of a workshop setting where we can really talk one-on-one with you and go through more of the plan details. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ken.
Thanks, Rebecca, and thanks everyone for your comments. Very good comments tonight, and those help us. Going forward, one thing I did hear, there were a few comments that people wanted to see more. What are you doing? What are you doing at those sites? Point taken, that's what probably the next meeting is going to more focus on. Come back, we'll look at some of these sites and tell us, okay, what would be done at these sites? And we're just not there yet. Okay, and then just another thought to keep in mind is we're working with kind of these ecosystems that are very dynamic. Just over the course of the 2 hours that we're here, we've watched the fog come in, and the fire risk actually today has changed just in the course of this meeting time. And that's how dynamic these landscapes are. And we'll come back and meet in September, probably. We'll probably be at City Hall, and we'll be later in the summer, and it's going to be drier, and the fire risk is going to be hotter, there'll be less fog, and there'll be all those things. And that's the natural kind of cycle of events here. And so why I bring this up is when people say, well, I've seen this and I've seen that, I can go to any one of these places on any given day, it's going to be a little bit different. And so there needs to be some recognition of kind of just the dynamism that occurs in these settings. And a plan can't capture that. That's out the window here. That's what you experience when you're out there on site. A plan is really an approach that provides recommendations of how should we manage these areas to the best that we can. And that's what we're going to try and do. So again, we thank you very much for your comments. They were very good comments. We heard them. And we'll try and do our best, and we'll see you in a few months. And don't hesitate to send more questions or comments.
Thanks, everyone. Drive safe tonight.